You're listening to the Minutes on Growth podcast, the show that brings you mindfully curated insights into relationships, spirituality, personal development, and everything in between, with your host, Tannaz Hosseinpour. Hi, everyone. It's Tannaz Hosseinpour, and welcome to another episode of Minutes on Growth. Today, we have the lovely Michael Anthony with us, author of the best-selling book, Think Unbroken. He's a coach, he's a mentor, and he's an educator for adult survivors of child abuse. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here with you.
Thank you for being on. Okay, let's dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your story and what led you to this path of healing and teaching?
Yeah. I'll give you the elevator pitch style. So I grew up in Indiana, in the Midwest. My mother was a drug addict and alcoholic. She actually cut off my right index finger when I was only 4 years old. So that kind of gives you baseline for how torturous my home life was. By the time that I was 6, she had married my stepfather, who was super abusive, the kind of guy you hope is never your stepfather. And while growing up in this abusive household, we were a part of the Mormon church. And by the time that I was 10, we were pretty much constantly homeless. I lived with 30 different families over the course of 2 years. And finally, one summer after being essentially abandoned, my grandmother adopted me, which you would think, oh, this is awesome, super great that happened. Except I'm biracial, black and white, and my grandmother is a super old racist white lady from a town you never heard of. So now insert this real intense identity crisis. I start turning to self-medication as a way to get myself through it. And by the time I was in my teens, I got expelled from school, put into a last chance program, didn't graduate high school on time. And I was thinking, like, how do you navigate life in trauma? Looking at my friends getting murdered, going to prison, me doing all kinds of terrible things, running from the police, breaking into houses, so on and so forth. The zip code you grow up in is very indicative of success in life. And by all measures, I should be dead or in jail. And in my late teens, I was thinking about what's the solution to poverty? And it just kept being like money, money, money. And so I chased corporate America. I wanted to do it legally. I didn't want to go to prison or be murdered like my friends. And the unfortunate upside of becoming very successful in corporate America at a very young age is that you become very successful at a very young age. And that led me to this place where it exacerbated all of the chaos of my life. And I had this moment when I was about 26 where I was 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day and drinking myself to sleep at night, that I was looking in the mirror, this round, fat face, and thinking to myself, like, this is not the person you promised yourself you were going to be. At 9 years old, this moment of literally stealing water from the house next door. So we had water in our house because it kept getting turned off because my mother wouldn't pay the bill. And in that moment saying, you're never going to live your life on these terms. Fast forward to 26, sitting in that moment, recognizing I was doing the exact thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. And I made a declaration to myself that what was I willing to do to have the life that I want to have? And for the next decade, it's been nothing but that. Doing all the work, going to all the seminars, reading all the books, all the therapy in the world, learning, growing, healing, changing everything. And about 4 years ago, I had just been sharing information that I thought was valuable, because often I would find myself in these rooms full of doctors, being the only person with no college education, learning about and understanding the impacts of trauma, the brain, the body, etc., and putting that online. And slowly it transformed in what it is now. And here I sit with you as a person who's written an international book and a coach and a speaker and an author, and doing all of these things in part due to will, and in part due to the fact that I made a decision and asked myself the hardest question we'll ever ask ourselves. And, what was I willing to do?
Wow. That was a lot to hear. And I'm so sorry that you experienced such a difficult childhood. And I honor you, honestly, for the way you've shown up, for the person that you are today, for taking that inspired action. Wow. Can you tell me, how were you able to overcome all of that?
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that, but let me be clear. I'm not an anomaly. I'm not somehow special. I don't know anything that everyone else doesn't know. I've just kind of put myself in this position of making a decision. And in that decision came growth and knowledge and information. And so much of this journey was, look, I think inherently we know the thing that we're supposed to be doing, right? And it is this self-destructive behavior that people, especially if they've had traumatic experiences, will leverage by not stepping into that place of doing that thing, right? So much of it is worth and validation and being told from the time that you're 5 years old, you're not good enough, smart enough, capable enough, whatever enough, thus that playing this role in adulthood and you being in this position where you have to reconcile your own experience of self. And that was my journey. I had to reconcile my own experiences to get to the point that I was willing to admit that I needed help in a not superficial way. Because for years I had been going to therapy and literally paying this therapist hundreds of dollars to tell him what I thought he wanted to hear. It's the dumbest thing you could ever imagine doing. And then being faced with this understanding of that's not enough. Therapy is not going to get you to where you need to go. You need to go deep on a personal growth journey. You need to get in shape. You need to quit smoking. You need to quit drinking all the time. You need to stop lying to your partners, to your friends, to your associates. You need to learn your values, wants, needs, interests, personal boundaries, create goals and assets, and move towards life with intention and clarity. And it was just all of that, just piece by piece by piece. But it all started with making that decision to create change. And then it was a snowball effect of just slowly, patience is so important in this journey, and just slowly putting myself in a position to learn, to grow, and have the willingness to recognize that I needed to go the extra mile for myself for the first time in my life. And I think that's what many people face, is that moment of making that declaration and then the decision for follow through. And it was my follow through for the entirety of my life that kind of led me into this path of despair, and recognizing like, oh, it's actually action that creates change in our lives. And that being kind of the catalyst for how I live my life now.
Wow. Wow. But my question is, this level of awareness that you're speaking of is such a high level of consciousness and awareness, to realize that change starts with self, to take accountability for change, to, say, I'm willing to literally be in the driver's seat of my own life. How did that awareness come to you at such a young age? Like, especially when you decided to take the legal path, like the legal route in corporate America. Was there someone who inspired you, or, was there a piece of advice that you heard?
The biggest thing is, like, if I look back on the entirety of my life, I know two things to be true. One is that we are the sum total of all of our experiences leading up till this moment. And so all of those experiences inform who we are. And two, I'm incredibly stubborn. And when I was young, I remember, you get access to a lot of information when you come from trauma and you're homeless and you're living with all these different people. And I had just felt, I always knew something about my home life was not copacetic. It didn't make sense. How could, on this one hand, we go to church and like see all these perfect, happy families, and in public or at restaurants on the rare occasion we happen to go, or whatever that may be, but at home it's pure terror and violence. And part of me was always aware of that. And as I headed into my teens, like, trust me, there is no part of me that did not recognize that stealing cars was not a good thing to do, or breaking into houses, or all the other terrible things I won't even get into right now. Subconsciously, I always knew, but they were predicated by choice. It was like, what am I going to do? I have to survive, right? Awareness is a survival mechanism. We're hyper aware, hyper vigilant. And especially if, like me, your sympathetic nervous system was always on overdrive, like I was just always acutely aware. And so it's a gift and a curse. The difference, though, is when my life started to change, is I took responsibility of that awareness and I started doing the things that I knew I needed to do. So I think there are people who are dissociated to the point where they have no human connection at all. I was on the razor's edge of that, because at one point I thought I was a sociopath, because I was so scared of emotional capacity, because it literally been beaten out of me as a child. And so I had to learn to cry again. I had to learn to accept human touch again. I had to learn all of these things as a part of this process. But the biggest part of it was like I had to learn to be okay with being who I was. And I think that moment is the hardest thing anyone does, because that level of self-awareness is so much deeper than the superficial things of whatever else you might find in life. It's so much about, can you get to the place where you put your feet on the ground and you're okay showing up with you? We all have that awareness, but getting to that place is what's so difficult.
Wow, so profound. One question that came up to me as you were saying that is, I wanted to ask, was there a moment where you had to forgive your past, not only yourself, but to forgive your family or to forgive those experiences? When did forgiveness play its part in your journey of healing?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I often get pushback on this because I don't think about it in the same way that a lot of people do. I think forgiveness is something often earned. And I come by that just from my understanding of seeing people consistently let me down time and time again, and not really showing up and earning that. And I think that there is a level of forgiveness in which you have to sit with yourself, because look, here's the thing. Nobody breathes for you. Nobody lives for you. Nobody loves for you. You're the only one capable of doing that. And if in your head you are constantly at battle with yourself, you're never going to move forward. You already have the entire world against you. So why would you do it to yourself? And I had to come to this moment. That's what reconciliation is, right? Coming to this moment and saying, okay, I'm just going to let it go. I'm going to let go. I'm going to say, I learn these mistakes. I learn from these mistakes. I forgive myself for the horrific things that I did and likely will do, because I'm a human being and I make mistakes. And I said, fine, so be it. Go live your life. Go live your life. Stop carrying the weight of this. And recognizing that it was a burden. And that's a hard place to get to, because you have shame, you have guilt, you have self-defeative, understandings of yourself. And that was working through that and reframing and rebuilding that narrative. And then forgiveness on the other side of it is, forgiveness is earned. There are people in my life, they'll never be forgiven. You can't justify to me child abuse, right? You can't justify, being an adult beating up a child. I will never forgive you for that. Godspeed. I hope you become a better person. But in my book, you're not going to get that pass. Now that varies. And so let me be clear. If you need forgiveness, if you need to let go, then let go. But me, I leverage that. It is a chip on my shoulder that drives me, that makes me work 14 hours a day and create content and write a book when I barely graduated high school and had straight F's in English. And it made me want to step into the gym and go in there. And it says, show me. Like, I sit there and I go, I will show you what I'm capable of doing, but I'm not going to give you my forgiveness because that's earned. I'm not saying that forgiveness can't ever be earned. Show me. That's what it's about.
Wow, that's such an interesting way to look at forgiveness. And it's actually really inspiring that you used your past as kind of a motivational resource to push you to your higher self, to push you to your potential. And wow, that's truly, truly amazing. Your story has really inspired me. You speak about the vortex. Can you please explain what the vortex is and what do you mean when you say, you need to get out of it?
Yeah, that's that place, that's that darkness inside of us, that place where we succumb to our own thoughts, where we succumb to the world, where we don't show up for ourselves, where we're 350 pounds watching the CrossFit games at 11 o'clock in the morning, eating chocolate cake, right? That's that place, that darkness where you don't show up for yourself, where you don't love yourself, where all of those people who said you're not good enough, you're not capable enough, they are running the narrative in your life. It's the every single time you should do the thing that you don't do and you beat yourself up for it. It's all of that part of you in which you exist, in which you make excuses, in which you leverage the understanding that bad things happen to you so you're not worthy of love or happiness or companionship. And that's the thing you have to remove yourself from. How do you navigate that? How do you work through it? Not get over it, because look, again, I don't think you can just stuff it down. I did that and that imploded my life. But how do you understand it and put it where it needs to go and reconcile it and then move through it, knowing, yes, I'm the sum total of all of my experiences. But as I always say, and it's on the back of my book, Though trauma may be our foundation, it is not our future. And that means making choices and declarations and creating actions and game plans and movements towards the life that you want to have, while understanding two things. One, there's no guarantee that on the backside you're going to get what you want. And two, you actually might.
I love that. You actually might. That's so powerful. Wow. I keep saying wow, but I'm just so amazed at your story. And, it's a story of resilience. It's a story of growth and of potentials fulfilled. Tell me this, if you could give one piece of advice to trauma survivors, what do you think should be their first step towards healing and towards moving away from the narrative that keeps them playing small, that keeps them playing unworthy and undeserving of all of life's blessings?
Yeah, it's all about acknowledgement, right? It's the most difficult thing that we'll do, is sit with the fact that bad things happen to us, and to look at that from a scope of saying, I am not culpable for the things that I can't possibly be responsible for as a child, right? You are, look, to come from this place where we are informed by all of our experiences in this place of development and youth, and looking at that and understanding that all of that programming is faulty, and then carrying that over into your adult life is disastrous. And so the thing is, we all know that it happened. We all know that there's that dark part of us that we hide, that's shamed. And look, and we live in a society, and chances are, if you're listening to this right now, you live in a society in which it's perfectly okay to hit a child. But if you touched an animal, you would go to prison. And I don't understand that. And that's the thing that I'm always fighting against, thinking about this understanding that as a child, you can't be responsible for those things. And you have to allow yourself to accept and acknowledge that bad things happen to you, and that you're going to have to seek help, because this is not a journey that you do alone. Going from that moment of my life's a disaster to creating change, to learning to love yourself, to heal, to grow, to find whatever it is that you need to find, you do that through community. And you do that through the willingness to face the truth that there's not shame in this, there's hope. And that's a hard thing to swallow, because you look at it and you go, well, if that were truth, why would my life be so disastrous? And I don't know. And it's unfair, and I'm sorry, and it sucks, and I wish that weren't the case, but it is. So what are you going to do about it?
What are you going to do about it? That's so, so true. I was as you were speaking, of course, that was my last question, but then another question came up to me, and it's,
go for it.
Is it difficult as a man? Was it difficult as a man asking for help? Because, of course, as women, we always have our girlfriends and our mothers and our aunts to talk about, to vent, and it's so normal. Like, venting is so normal for women. Whereas for men, you're always told, man up, like, don't cry, like, ugh, you're overthinking, you're being so sensitive, you're being a girl. And to actually, show up and say, listen, I need support from the community, or I need to go to therapy, or I need a coach, or I need a mentor. Was it difficult? Like, that's my question.
Yeah, that was actually probably the hardest thing that I've done in this entire process, because I recognized, like, I was terrified of that idea, because twofold. One, I'm a person of color, and I grew up in a place where if you're a person of color, you don't ever ask for help. It shows weakness. Then you add being a man, then you add being a trauma survivor, then you add all the things. I effectively had to teach myself how to be a human being again, right? And at one point, understanding that place of the shame and guilt of asking for help is not an association that I created, but instead one that was given to me. And when I understood that, one of the things that happened, which I think is probably the most important, and is also, if I dare say, my superpower, is I don't care what people think about me. That doesn't say that I don't take value and understanding from the people in my life who are important, or who are like, Michael, you're being a jerk, or whatever that thing may be, right? But it is about, like, if you see me walking into my therapist's office and you're a person off the street and you point a finger at me and you laugh, I'm not going to care, right? And that to me is one of the things that happened that really became profound, is I stopped leveraging people's opinions of me, and I did what I needed to do to have my life on my terms. And so, yes, it's incredibly difficult. Being a man and asking for help is even more difficult. I don't even know, like, I think about this all the time, and there's no easy way to get over that boundary other than doing it. And it's the most vulnerable thing that most of us do across the board, man, woman, whatever, however you identify, doesn't matter. Getting over that threshold to say, I need support because I'm a human and there's 8 billion of us, and chances are one other person might have an understanding of this, is terrifying when we come from societies that say you're weak. And I hate that, and I want to change that, and I want to erase that. And my hope is in time we do.
And I'm sure we will, especially with men like yourself, sharing your story. When we share our story, I really believe that healing around the world takes place because you're letting it out, and there's this sense of, okay, I'm not alone. There is someone else out there that understands me, that feels what I'm going through. And if they got through it, if someone, I always say, when we see people succeeding in life, it just means that it's possible for us too. So when we share that story, we give hope. So thank you so much for sharing your story. And if the audience wants to hear more from you, which I'm sure they will, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, so I'm on all the social medias at Michael Unbroken across the board. My website with information about my book, Think Unbroken, and my coaching and any seminars and all that stuff, it's at thinkunbroken.com.
Thank you.
Oh, and of course, the Michael Unbroken podcast,
yeah.
which I always forget to tell people about, even though I spend an unbelievable amount of time doing it. So the Michael Unbroken podcast, that's everywhere also. I release 2 shows a week.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for being on the show, for sharing your story, for being vulnerable, and for revealing your light to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Speak soon. Thank you for joining us this week on Minutes on Growth. If you enjoyed today's episode, then make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now.